Hello guys, this is Scott here, and today we're going to do something a little bit different. This is something that was inspired by someone on YouTube called Gavin Partridge, who runs the Gav's Weather Vids channel. It's a very good channel, and it looks at forecasts, and Gavin makes long range forecasts and short range forecasts for the UK and Europe. Another thing he does is historical videos, and that's one of the things I'm going to do in today's video. I asked Gavin if he didn't mind me making one of these, and he said sure, go for it. So why not? As I said, Gavin's a good channel. I'm actually going to leave his channel details in the description, so if you want to check him out, and please do, as I said, he's a good channel, then the link's in the description. So as I said, today we're going to do a historical video. I've decided in this one we're going to look at the spring and the month of June of 2012. Now, for those of you that don't know, this was a very interesting period because March 2012 was a very exceptionally warm and dry month that led on to a very cold and wet April, then a May of two halves, and then the wettest June on record. So I was thinking, this would be a good video to start with if this was to become a thing on my channel. All the charts you're going to see in this video are from the website wettest, so thank you very much to them for allowing me to use their charts in my video today. And some of the statistics you hear in this video come from the Met Office as well as Trevor Harley's British weather website. Personal weather website. It's a very great resource, Trevor Harley's website, and I'm also going to leave that in the description. He has done records from all months in the UK, even going back to the 1900s and before that. It's a great resource if you want to see the weather for certain months. Okay, so we're going to get on with it now. As you can see, we've started on the 1st of March 2012, so the beginning of the meteorological spring. March 2012 had a central England temperature of 8.3 degrees Celsius, which actually makes it the 4th warmest March on record. On top of that, it was extremely dry and extremely sunny, so if you like warm, dry weather in spring, it almost sounds like the perfect March. So March 2012 started off quite dry. As you can see, we've got a ridge of high pressure on top of us, and that persists through the 1st, 2nd, 3rd. Then later on the 3rd and the 4th we bring a brief Atlantic trough through, but there's not really much rain on this. As I said, that was partly the reason why the month was so dry, because the troughs really didn't carry that much rain with them. So on the 4th and the 5th that quickly moves through, and by the 6th we're back under high pressure again, and it turns warmer and sunnier. Then on the 7th we bring a very deep Atlantic storm into the north of Scotland, so that brings some wet and windy weather up in the far northwest. But the southwest, as you can see, remains under the high pressure, so there's really again not much rain for those. By the time we get to the 8th, however, the high pressure's coming back virtually everywhere, and that moves in fully the 9th, 10th, 11th, and it comes into quite a deep high actually, and that then moves right on top of us on the 12th and into the 13th. By the 14th, however, it does start to move away, so we do go into a very brief Atlantic spell. But however, it is actually quite a slack feature, so again there's no rain on this, or very little rain I should say, which is again a reason for why this month was so dry, because any of the Atlantic spells didn't really produce much rain. Then by the 19th the high pressure starts to come back, and this is actually where the real heat of March 2012 becomes notable, because as we get into the March 20th, the spring equinox, that high begins to move over the country and then up to the east of the country, and what this does is starts to bring up a very warm southeasterly wind by the 22nd. As you can see, if you follow the isobars back, that's going all the way back to the Mediterranean, so some very, very mild air. And on top of that, the skies are completely sunny, So as we go through the 23rd, 24th, into the 25th, it stays dry and it gets hotter and hotter and hotter, or warmer I should say. Then as we go to the 27th, this is actually where the March heat peaks, and it peaks at 23.6 Celsius in Scotland, which is 74.5 Fahrenheit. Now that temperature in Scotland in March is really quite remarkable, because if you expect really the temperatures in March should be 9 or 10 degrees, so to see 23 degrees in March under clear skies is something very rare indeed. Then on the 28th I actually recorded my high temperature, and that was of 21 Celsius. And another thing that makes March 2012 quite notable is it was known for some very large diurnal temperature ranges. So I recorded a temperature high of 21 degrees on the 28th of March, but then that night it fell down to 1. So you're talking large diurnal temperatures over 20 degrees in some places, which again is very rare for March. Then as we move into the 29th, the high actually starts to retrogress. Now retrogression is basically the opposite of the zonal flow. So in a normal weather pattern, weather systems, that's high pressure and low pressure systems, will move across the Atlantic in a west to east fashion. So weather systems will cross the Atlantic and move in to Western Europe. That's very typical, but sometimes high pressure systems can retrogress, and that's actually when they go from east to west. So what this can actually do is, when this happens, it can be a sign of some very, very cold weather to come. In fact, that's actually what happens, because as we move into the 30th, the high actually starts to move further west. Now, there's still quite a lot of warm air over the UK, so it does still stay very warm. But look at that, by the 31st we're in a complete northerly flow. If you follow those isobars back, it's going all the way up to the Arctic. They're going all the way to the Arctic. So those temperatures are going to quickly fall away. Then as we move into April, we start with a northerly to northwesterly flow. Now April is also very remarkable because it has a central England temperature of 7.2 degrees, which is over a degree colder than March. Now normally to get an April that is colder than March in the same year is very rare, but to get an April that's significantly colder than March is something very remarkable. April 2012 was also actually one of the wettest Aprils on record, and it was also very, very dull. So again on the 1st we've got this northerly to northwesterly flow, and as we move into the 2nd that intensifies. Now by this point all those 20°C temperatures are gone, and now we're only a couple degrees above freezing. And then actually on overnight 2nd into the 3rd we get this little area of low pressure that crosses the country, and it actually brings heavy snow to the north of the country, so to Yorkshire and Lancashire, even blizzard conditions actually. So just to put this into context, in the space of 4 or 5 days we've gone from early summer temperatures to heavy snow, and that is really very remarkable indeed. As we move on into the 4th, that low pressure then clears away, and then we bring in this easterly, which is quite cool. And then a high pressure through the 5th, 6th and the 7th reverses that back into the north. So again it goes very cool. Now up until this point April's actually been quite dry, and to the 8th it is very dry. But then by the 9th this is where the big change happens, because we bring a very deep Atlantic depression through. Look at that. 985 millibars, that's actually a low pressure system that you'd expect in a month in the autumn and the winter, let alone spring. And that then moves right across us on the 10th and the 11th before moving away into Norway on the 12th. And another thing that was very interesting about that period is the 10th to the 12th of April 2012 was actually very thundery. There was quite a lot of thunder and lightning around. My area missed out, lucky us, but there were some pretty strong storms for April and some pretty heavy rain in those. Some of these storms you'd more expect in summer, but it was because of this polar maritime air mass. Then as we move into the 13th and the 14th, we bring another Atlantic depression in, and that brings more heavy rain to the south. Then by the 15th, we're then going back into this northerly wind. So again, it turns much cooler, and again, it settles down briefly on the 16th, but then by the 17th, we bring another very deep Atlantic depression in. Again, this brings heavy rain and wind. And actually, one thing that I remember from this spell actually on the 18th was, because of the very warm March, a lot of the trees were actually blossoming at this time. And if you watch some of my time lapses, that tree that's usually in my garden gets quite a lot of blossom in the spring. And actually in April 2012 it was in full blossom on the 18th, and this massive gust of wind hit it and like blew loads of twigs off it and like half of the blossom, and it looked like, it honestly for a second looked like there was a complete blizzard out there. But again, it was a very cool day, the 18th of April 2012, so it was quite surprising to actually think, it wasn't surprising to think that it was actually snowing. But no, it was heavy rain, and that continues into the 19th. And then as we go through the 20th, this low pressure pretty much stays on top of us for several days. Look, 21st, 22nd, 23rd. And that leaves it very cool and very unsettled, so we get some very heavy rain in this period. Then by the 24th, that low moves away, but just for it to bring another low in off the Atlantic. So again, more rain and wind comes in from a very deep autumnal depression that again is very rare in spring, and that crosses us on the 26th before clearing away on the 27th. Then we build a temporary ridge of high pressure, and so it does settle down slightly now, and we bring a slightly warmer easterly in. So temperatures actually reach 19°C on the 30th. So again, it's quite unusual for April not for us not to reach 20°C, but obviously April 2012 was a cold one and it didn't happen. And then obviously on the 30th, as you can see, we brought another low pressure system in, which brought more rain and wind to the south. Then we move into May, and we have this ridge of high pressure and the low pressure to the south. May 2012 in terms of temperatures was actually quite average, with a CET of 11.7 degrees. It was very much a month of two halves actually, with a cold wet first half and then some very warm sunshine in the second half. It was slightly wetter than average, but also slightly duller than average. Now, the 1st of May, we get off to quite a settled start in the north. Now, this is something that's quite rare. When you start to see high pressure to the north of the country, it's a very bad sign if you're looking for summer warmth, because actually what the high does is forces these lows to south. Look how deep far south those lows are going. And so essentially it's forcing the jet stream much farther south, and this was the cause for the very wet spring and summer of 2012, was because these lows were travelling so far south, much farther south than you'd expect. So by the 2nd of May, look how far south that low is. It's like off the coast of Spain and France, when normally at this time of the year you'd be expecting them to more be up towards Iceland. By the 3rd, that high does stay in the north of Scotland, and that's another interesting thing about this month, was Scotland was actually quite dry. It was drier than average, whereas England and Wales were exceptionally wet. By the 4th of May, we start to break that high down, and then once again we bring another area of low pressure in from the Atlantic, and that moves in on the 5th, and then we bring another one in the 6th, and then the 7th, and then we set up this kind of Atlantic conveyor belt. So by the 8th and the 9th, we've just got low after low coming in off the Atlantic. Then on the 11th and the 12th we try to bring this high into this 1040 millibar high, so it temporarily settles down, but that doesn't last, because by the time we get to the 14th of May this very deep low moves into the north. Look, 975 millibars, which again is very remarkable for May, which you'd honestly expect to be the calmest month of the year in British weather. But no, we get another very deep autumnal storm. And that brings more heavy rain, this time mainly for Scotland. Then around the 15th, 16th, the high pressure actually has another go. But again, it's pushed out of the way on the 17th by another low, which brings more rain and wind in on the 18th and the 19th. Then on the 20th, we actually see quite a bit of a change. We actually develop a col over the country, and a col is sort of like a no man's land in terms of pressure. So what we see is it's an area between two areas of low pressure and two areas of high pressure, and they're very, very slack, so nothing really happens in them. And on the 20th, 21st, we have this col over us, and it actually looks like for a second the low pressure's actually going to win and bring more unsettled weather in. But actually what we see is the high pressure actually took over. So a very cool wet May actually turned into something very dry. So the 23rd and the 24th of May, that high pressure completely takes over. And by the 25th of May, we're bringing some very warm easterly winds off the continent. So temperatures are now up into the mid-20s, high 20s, all across the country. And that persists through the 26th. And then on the 27th, we actually record the highest temperature of 29.3 Celsius, or 84.7 Fahrenheit in the Scottish Highlands, which actually breaks the May high record in Scotland. So it's record-breaking heat in Scotland, when really to get the warmest temperature in Scotland is unusual to start with. For such a cold, wet May to turn very warm at the end again is something quite unusual. And that persists through the 28th, and really we end May with warm weather and high pressure. So the 28th, 29th, 30th, 31st, we're under the high pressure. And then we move into June, and really we're going to see a very, very big change here for June. As you can see, that high pressure is breaking down and it's about to let the Atlantic in. June 2012 had a CET of 13.5, which actually makes it a colder than average month. In fact, it's significantly cooler than average. And it was also the wettest June on record, as well as actually being in the top 3 most cyclonic Junes on record. So it's a very miserable summer month if you like warm, sunny weather. So the 1st of June is actually the last day of high pressure. That high pressure is breaking down, and then by the 2nd of June we're bringing this low pressure back in, and that's fully in by the 3rd. And the 3rd of June 2012 was a very, very, very miserable day. In fact, I recorded a high temperature of 9 degrees on that day, and it rained non-stop. And in fact I fared better than some of the other places, because actually Emily Moor in West Yorkshire actually peaked at 6.5 degrees. 6.5 degrees in June, that's temperatures you'd expect in January. But we're getting those temperatures in June, so it's not summer-like at all. Pretty much everywhere's wet, and that low crosses us on the 3rd and the 4th. But even when that moves away, by the 5th we bring another low pressure system in, and another one on the 6th and the 7th, and that was really all June 2012 was. We were just bringing deep lows in. Look at that on the 8th, another very deep autumnal depression, 985 millibars, again very unusual for June, and that clears away on the 9th just to be replaced by another area of low pressure after another. So in a way we set up this Atlantic conveyor belt. But the 13th, 14th, 15th we bring another very deep Atlantic depression in. 16th, 17th, 18th. And then this was actually the only point where we brought some dry weather for June, in fact, because on the 20th we built this very, very shallow ridge of high pressure, so it actually turns very briefly summer-like, and it was the only day in the entire month, I'll be honest, that actually felt like a day in summer. But it doesn't last, because by the time we get to the 21st, the summer solstice, the next area of low pressure is coming in, and then we bring another deep depression in on the 22nd into the 23rd, another one on the 24th, then on the 25th of June we go into another northerly wind for a second, so it goes cooler and wetter. But then by the 26th we actually develop quite an interesting pattern in which high pressure starts to ridge into the south of the country. So for southern areas it actually turns quite fine and settled, and in a southwesterly wind, which don't forget in June is quite warm, the temperatures start to rise, and that gets stronger into the 27th. But also notice that out in the Atlantic we've got this area of low pressure forming, and by the time we get to the 28th of June, these warm southerly winds brought up from Spain are bringing hot air up from the Mediterranean. At the same time we're bringing cool, moist air in from the Atlantic. So this is a classic Spanish plume, and this is the perfect setup for some very, very severe thunderstorms. Even supercells were reported this day, and in fact there were 64,000 lightning strikes across the country, with Lincolnshire and the northeast of the UK being battered by severe supercells with actually golf ball sized hail reported. Another interesting thing was, at the time of one of the supercells this day, the Olympic torch relay was actually in northeast England, and the relay actually had to be paused because of lightning. Obviously you're running around with a big metal torch, obviously there's a real risk of getting struck by lightning, but it was such an exceptional way to end a very miserable summer month. But it doesn't last, because by the time we get to the 29th, that low pressure moves in and it brings cool, wet weather all across the country. And then really by the 30th, that's how we finish June, with the same pattern, low pressure coming in off the Atlantic. As for the rest of summer, July actually carried on with the trend from June. In fact, it was just an Atlantic conveyor belt. Then the second half of July actually turned slightly more settled, and then August was sort of a southeast northwest split, if you like, where the south and east was actually warmer than average, but the north and west was actually duller than average. And there are also quite a lot of thundery spells in August, so maybe I'll have a look at them in another future video. But actually that's going to do it for this video. If you like these sort of things, you know, maybe this is becoming a thing on my channel, I'd be happy to do more of these. But if not, then I suppose this will just be like a fun one-off. So thanks for watching, guys, and remember to check out those channels I listed in the description below. Thanks.